Good afternoon, my name is Josh from CyclonesOZ, and here is your detailed afternoon update on Tropical Cyclone Alfred, a Category 2 strength tropical cyclone about 600 kilometres offshore from the southeastern corner of Queensland. This is a significant threat to land where a Category 2 strength tropical cyclone landfall at unprecedented intensity is expected to cross the coast around the Brisbane area in about 72 hours' time, and you need to act now and follow all directions listed in this forecast update to prepare your property to save yourself from significant damages and heartache from this tropical cyclone. This is a serious and life-threatening situation. Let's jump straight into the details with Tropical Cyclone Alfred. If you are brand new to the channel, please consider subscribing, but apart from that, let's get stuck straight into things. You can see it's developing quite nicely. Once again, it has lost a lot of its convection. It's in a very hostile environment right now, but if we pause the satellite snap at the latest imagery, you can see that it's gone from about 6 hours ago to being pretty sausage-shaped, to be honest, very elongated, which is not healthy for a tropical cyclone at all, to being quite circular in nature. So this tropical cyclone really now getting itself together once again, and it looks like it's slowed down dramatically, which means that that turn is now beginning to happen towards the Queensland coastline, which is just fantastic news as a forecaster, because we now know pretty much exactly where the system is going to make that landfall and cross the coast in Queensland. I'll get to that in just a few moments, but again, this system looking quite photogenic here offshore from Queensland. Doesn't really look like a tropical cyclone at all, but it's certainly got tropical cyclone force winds about 400 to 500 kilometres south of the system's centre. Lord Howe Island blowing 56 kilometres an hour with gusts up to 74 kilometres an hour. That's well and truly cyclonic in terms of those wind gusts there. Strong winds also reported along the New South Wales coastline, winds around 50 to 60 kilometres an hour there. Double Island Point well away from the storm centre, blowing at 50 k's an hour, and some strong winds also being reported around the Gold Coast coastline up around Stranbrook Island, then further north up around Moreton and Bribie Island as well. Those winds blowing quite strong at this time. Alfred's certainly getting its stuff together right now, and it is looking quite healthy. Even though it doesn't look like a tropical cyclone at all, it's been stripped of all of its convection, it is still warm core, and you can see temperature observations around the centre of this system. If this was an extratropical cyclone, that'd be a lot cooler. Lord Howe Island still in the mid-20s right now, so that's why this is still a tropical cyclone and not an extratropical low, and either way, it doesn't really matter all that much for Queensland. Let's jump straight into that forecast right now. You can see that turn has pretty much begun now, with all major forecast models suggesting the motion towards the Queensland coastline is expected. As you can make sense of, this is a southern-dominated system, so all the severe conditions are on the southern side of this storm, which makes a big deal in the forecast as well in terms of the conditions that we're expecting along the Queensland coastline. Anywhere further south, the landfall is going to get thrashed by this tropical cyclone, whereas those conditions further north, the tropical cyclone, whilst they will be quite gnarly, they'll pale in comparison to what's expected south of the landfall site. So pushing this forecast forward through to the landfall site, we have had that jump further north in the forecast models by the looks of things, approaching landfall on Thursday, and you can see the storm expected to tighten itself up quite nicely and actually intensify a little bit through Thursday as it gets itself over the warm waters of the East Australian current and approaching landfall with those wind gusts up to 150 kilometres an hour here, which, like I said, will be at their strongest on the southern side of the system. So whilst it looks quite ugly right now, and it's going to continue looking quite ugly for the next 24 hours, by Wednesday afternoon as this system approaches the Queensland coastline along the East Australian current here, expecting some really significant development and some quite quick development in this tropical cyclone. And whilst it won't rapidly intensify, it will certainly organise itself quite nicely, and that's going to result in it being brought ashore as a significant tropical cyclone impact. Considering it's making its turn now towards the Queensland coastline, and it was expected to do that later on this afternoon and evening, but considering that process has now begun now, the landfall site has been brought further north again, and I reckon that that's going to happen around Kubeltrua, north of Brisbane and around Bribie Island, that sort of area, in line once again with what the Bureau of Meteorology is expecting, and I feel like we can now lock in that location. And this morning we were thinking Brisbane to Gold Coast for that landfall site, but I feel right now, late Thursday evening into early Friday morning, if you check out other forecast models as well, GFS still a little bit delayed in their forecast update right now, but the Icon forecast model and also the Axis forecast model, which is what the Bureau of Meteorology feeds their data off of, they're all calling for that landfall pretty much on top of Brisbane, give or take 50 kilometres to the north or the south. And I feel like we can lock that in now sometime Thursday night into early or very early Friday morning. A crossing of either North Stranbrook Island or in towards Moreton Island first. It definitely won't pass any further north of Moreton Island by the looks of things. I think that's highly unlikely at that time before a landfall either on the southern tip of Bribie Island or in towards Kubeltrua as well, just north of Brisbane around the Redcliffe area, which will, like we said, may bring those worst conditions ashore around the Brisbane area. but it looks like Moreton Island and North Stranbroke Island will save Brisbane from the worst conditions. I'll get to the impacts and how to prepare for this system in just a few moments. I just want to really hammer home this forecast right now. There's no major discrepancies between the forecast models either. It's give or take 6 hours for landfall, and my best guess right now, whilst it's pretty much as good as the Bureau of Meteorology's, I still feel like we know pretty much exactly when this tropical cyclone will cross the coast, and I reckon that'll be around 10 p.m. on Thursday night local time. And like I said, that first crossing happening either on North Stranbroke Island or on Moreton Island, and then a couple of hours later moving through in towards the Brisbane area, just towards the north of Brisbane, actually around Redcliffe, which will likely happen at about midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning on Friday morning as a Category 2 strength tropical cyclone. Weakening will be very quick to take place, and you can see that this tropical cyclone will become a tropical low pretty much by sunrise on Friday morning, and then a carcass of the system by lunchtime on Friday. It'll be very quick to die off as it heads north of Toowoomba and then inland towards Dalby, and then the long-range forecast calls for it to recurve down in towards New South Wales. We'll be talking about some significant rainfall down there, and here's a sneak peek of the stuff. Plenty of rainfall expected down into the northeastern corner and the northern section of New South Wales as well, which will just add further woes to the flooding problems in the Murray-Darling Basin right now. Again, we'll get to that in a future forecast update, but certainly going to be quite a rough one around the Brisbane area. This forecast right now, in terms of what we're expecting impacts-wise, this will lead me nicely on into the impact section of the forecast, but you can see with that landfall being around that Redcliffe area, those really gnarly cyclone conditions expected to occur around the south of the Stranbroke Island area and then being funneled in towards the Gold Coast and clipping the extreme northern corner of New South Wales. You can see here, anywhere further north of Byron Bay is where the most significant conditions are going to be. Like I said, with this storm being a southern-dominated system here, the northern side of the landfall sites, so anywhere north of Coolbeltura, up through Maroochydore, Caloundra, Noosa, for example, those conditions are actually going to be comparatively quite calm, and even though Maroochydore is going to be as far away from the landfall site as, say, Coomera will be or Sanctuary Cove will be, Maroochydore will only see winds barely scratching 90 kilometres an hour, whereas Coomera and areas along the coastline around Stranbroke Island could be seeing wind gusts as high as 150 kilometres an hour, and I feel like that highlights the fact that this storm is going to be dominated on the southern side. Just with how it's forming right now, it's just not got enough time ahead of it to really properly organise itself into a robust tropical cyclone, which means anywhere further south the landfall site will get the most significant impacts from this tropical cyclone. That includes Brisbane, areas around Brisbane, so Logan City, Beaudesert, Boonah, that sort of area, and then further south down towards Coomera, Sanctuary Cove, and Orang, the Gold Coast as well. Some really significant conditions can be expected down there, and those powerful tropical cyclone conditions expected as far south as Byron Bay. Still, gale force winds expected further south in Byron Bay as well. We'll be seeing gale force winds sweep into the coastline along the landfall time period, so late Thursday night into early Friday morning as far south as Coffs Harbour, with a very significant wind gusts expected out towards Tamborine Mountain as well, and some significant winds also expected into the Gold Coast hinterland. But like I said, ground zero for these really strong winds will be along Moreton Island, Stranbroke Islands, and then down through the Gold Coast and down towards Burleigh Heads and Tweed Heads. Further south than that, you'll be seeing Category 1 strength tropical cyclone conditions, so not as severe, but some really damaging, locally destructive wind gusts expected across much of the Gold Coast and then up towards Stranbroke Island. And you can see that on the forecast right now, 135, 140 kilometres an hour upon landfall, and you can see on the wind accumulation map here through the entire duration of landfall, which includes Thursday through to Friday. Peak wind gusts here just offshore up to about 150 kilometres an hour, reciprocated between the major forecast models as well. I mean, the GFS is generally a bit of a low baller on these wind speeds, but the eastern and the axis very congruent between 130 to 150 kilometre an hour wind gusts. I think anything stronger than 150 kilometres an hour, which is what I'd class as ultra destructive wind gusts, they're very unlikely at this time. So anything over 150 kilometres an hour would cause some serious damage and some serious devastation around the Gold Coast. Keep in mind, these homes are not built for tropical cyclones at all down through the Brisbane area. The Gold Coast, they're a little bit more sturdy down there, just considering their kind of higher socioeconomic area. The homes are generally a little bit more well built, but older homes, especially in towards the suburban areas of Brisbane, they're not going to stand a fighting chance against wind speeds in excess of 150 kilometres an hour. So whilst they are a little bit more protected by Stranbroke Island and some of the hills just adjacent to the coastline through the Brisbane area, Logan City is still expecting winds up to 110 kilometres an hour. So wind gusts in the suburban areas of Brisbane will be very significant, and that's for sure, and will cause some significant property damage. So again, make sure you've deployed your shutters as well. If you've got really, or if you live in a really old home and you know for a fact that it's going to blow over, I'd highly recommend boarding up windows as well, getting some plywood and just strapping them over exposed windows, pruning up the garden as well. And I'll get to the full story on how to prepare for this tropical cyclone in the impact section, which is at the end of this forecast update. Rainfall is also going to be a big problem with this tropical cyclone. There's going to be some really intense rainfall south of the Landfall site, which, like I said, north of Brisbane. The heaviest falls will be around the Gold Coast and into the Gold Coast hinterland. That's just going to trap all of this rainfall and the moisture streaming in from the coastline. I believe the Icon model does the best job in terms of rainfall predictions right now, and I feel like this is exactly a representation of what's going to be expected. So south of the Landfall site along the coastline, accumulations will be between 150 up to 300 millimeters. Brisbane probably closer to that 150 or 200 millimeter mark across the metro area between Thursday and Friday. Much higher accumulations expected into the hinterland area around Springbrook National Park. Accumulations out there can be as high as 600 or 700 millimeters on just Thursday and Friday alone, or to the 9 a.m. on Friday when this cyclone will be making landfall. So some absurd accumulations expected out there and some really intense rainfall rates around the Mount Tambourine area, averaging 50 millimeters an hour for up to 12 hours at a time. So again, some really significant rainfall accumulations possible. Further south than that, down towards Byron Bay and along the coastline, accumulations into the northeastern corner of New South Wales will be between 200 and 300 millimeters, likely slightly higher than that over the course of the entire week. We'll be seeing falls up to about 500 millimeters there. But again, further inland out towards Lismore, Nimbin, and those areas that drain into the Richmond River and the Clarence Rivers, down towards Grafton and Yamba, through the hills in these areas, rainfall accumulations could be as high as 500 or 600 millimeters, with week-long spot rainfall accumulations up to 1,000 millimeters possible along the Queensland-New South Wales border. Some monster rainfall accumulations expected as a result of this tropical cyclone, that's for sure. And again, considering its slow moving and southern bias here, the worst of the rainfall will be coming ashore into the Brisbane and the Gold Coast area. I mean, all these mountains here, which reach about 2,000 metres up, some of them, or really high up indeed, 1,500 to 2,000 metres, they will be wringing the skies dry here. Some huge rainfall accumulations possible as a result. Not quite 2,000 metres, rather. That's reserved for the tallest mountains in the Blue Mountain Range down around the Kosciuszko area, but still some of these mountains up to about 1,500 metres in height, so some really high rainfall accumulations possible as a result. They'll just be wringing the skies dry, and I feel that that's the best analogy for it right now. Storm surge also a major threat, and these waves will be picking up from late Wednesday night, so again, all shore-based coastal activities absolutely not recommended from tonight, that's for sure. And you should be well away from the beach and well away from the shore from today, or through today as well, because you can see significant wave heights now starting to really creep up along the Gold Coast, down towards the Sunshine Coast, and these are choppy waves as well from a tropical cyclone. These are disorganized choppy waves, not a beautiful surfing set, so absolutely no surfing, and I feel like that goes without saying. There will be a few crackpots that try and surf these waves, and they do it at their own risk. They're daredevils, and I mean, that's okay. Again, it is completely at their own risk, but if you are an amateur surfer, even an experienced surfer, these are extremely dangerous waves to be in the water with, because they are unpredictable. They're not with high duration times. They are coming ashore very quickly, and you can see peak wave heights here, unlike anything ever seen before in this part of Queensland into New South Wales, 8 to 9 metres offshore, with significant wave heights around the Moreton buoy have been reported up to about 15 metres from this tropical cyclone. So again, some monster wave height, and these wave heights sustained through Wednesday in towards Thursday, and only clearing out by early Friday morning as well. So when you've got seas and surf coming ashore at about 5 or 6 metres in height, that's going to cause some monster coastal erosions along the Gold Coast and into the northeastern corner of New South Wales. So again, if you live right on the coastline, or if your house looks over a cliff, I'd personally recommend you evacuating. Of course, that's not official advice right now, but I would actually recommend you getting out of there, or moving all of the valuables in your house to another location, because with this kind of erosion, you can see shores recede by 10 metres inland. These are some massive waves, and again, unlike anything seen ashore around the Gold Coast area, I personally think that the Gold Coast will be okay. I mean, I don't see the chance of these waves getting right up and choked in towards the canals area, but when you're talking about waves along the coastline up to about 5 or 6 metres, some monster flooding can be expected here, and there's really no sand dunes to protect the Broad Beach area and out towards Surfers Paradise, and then further north and that up towards Main Beach. Again, some really nice homes in these areas that are at some really substantial risks of being flooding. If you own a boat as well, I've put a post out on Facebook. I know a lot of people around the Gold Coast have boats that are tied up to jetties in the front of their house or in marinas. Make sure your ropes are loose as well, and if you have the chance to and you can navigate around the canals, get them up towards Sanctuary Cove is a good idea. Further north out towards Brisbane and into some of the marinas around Brisbane, they'll be more protected there, but it's now way too late to get yourself up in towards the Whitsundays or Harvey Bay, that sort of area along the Sunshine Coast. These waves are just too high right now from this tropical cyclone. It's extremely dangerous to be moving your boat around. You want to have all of your marine-based stuff completely squared away by tonight, that's for sure, with this tropical cyclone. And like I said, I personally recommend evacuating if your house is built within about 10 metres of the coastline. There's going to be some massive coastal erosion as a result here, unlike anything seen around the southeastern corners of Queensland. And yeah, that leads me nicely on into the next part of the video, which is the predicted impacts from this tropical cyclone and how to prepare for them. So again, we're talking about these massive wind gusts into the Brisbane metro area. So over the next couple of days, we're going to be seeing these winds steadily increase. And you've got the rest of today and into tomorrow morning to adequately prepare for this tropical cyclone as well. But beyond tomorrow morning, you want to have all of your preparations completely squared away. So for your home, you want to make sure that your windows have shutters on them or plywood, especially if they're less well-built homes, not modern and not built to cyclone standards, which very few homes are around the Gold Coast and into the Brisbane area. And if you sustain damage on severe thunderstorms, then I'd highly recommend boarding your house up properly as well. Putting plywood over doors. I imagine there's plywood shortages around hardware shops such as Bunnings as well right now, so again, get in while you can. If you live in exposed coastal locations or in elevated locations as well, and you tend to get really strong winds, or you're starting to get really strong winds approaching gale force right now, then you're likely to receive some very strong wind gusts from this tropical cyclone. And again, these wind gusts along the coast will be up to 140 kilometers an hour. If you live in high-rise apartment complexes in the Gold Coast or Brisbane, consult the front desk as well and see what management has to say here, and tell them, is this building built to withstand winds up to 150 kilometers an hour? If not, they will definitely be on the way to evacuate you or get yourself into a more safer location. But if it is, which most buildings are, considering they are built to handle magnitude 4 or 5 earthquakes, that's kind of the code around the southeastern corners of Queensland, which means that they will be fine on 150 kilometer an hour winds. But just better to be safe than sorry. If you live in a high-rise apartment, make sure you are checking with the front desk, and I'm sure they'll be all over it if there is a risk of the buildings crumbling. Buildings crumbling, that is completely unheard of in the southeastern corners of Queensland. They do every now and then receive wind speeds like this from east coast lows. Not quite to the magnitude of this, but again, this isn't absolutely unprecedented in the sense that they've never seen anything remotely close to this before. Every now and then you get an east coast low that throws ashore wind speeds of 125 or 130 kilometers an hour. All the high-rise buildings are fine with that. In short, you will be fine if you're in a high-rise, but certainly check with the management and see what they have to say. The building will likely sway around quite a lot. And I'm talking about, this is ultra high-rise, like you're 40 or 50 floors up or even higher than that. For a 10-story building or a 15-story building, even a 30-story building, you will be completely fine. And keep in mind, these buildings are built to withstand winds like that, and there's nothing to really be panicking about unless management has something to say. And if that was the case, they'd be getting you out of there, that's for sure. I don't want to be inciting panic, that's for sure, in regards to this system. If you live in exposed coastal locations down in towards New South Wales, make sure you're ready for winds up to 140 kilometers an hour as well. This goes for people as far south as Byron Bay. The majority of homes will withstand 140 kilometer an hour winds, but if you've got tin roof, expect roof failures as well. Pruning up the garden and making sure no branches can fall onto the roof as well and cause significant problems for yourself there. Further south, down towards the southeastern corners of Queensland and into the extreme northeastern parts of New South Wales, expect major flash flooding and major riverine flooding, and expect this to be some of the worst flooding on record in this part of New South Wales as well. This will be much worse than the Lismore floods of 2024 late in August, and comparable to the 2022 floods down in Lismore as well. Significant flooding expected in all of the rivers in this part of New South Wales, and major flooding expected as far south as the Richmond River, I believe, that throws the Clarence River rather, that flows through Yamba down through Grafton, then down towards Yamba, expecting moderate flooding in those areas. And then further south than that, significant falls also expected here and there, so flash flooding possible as far south as Port Macquarie and Taree, but riverine flooding there should be minor at the absolute worst. So again, if you live in a flood-prone area, and if you live in a flood-prone area, you know, because you would have flooded sometime in the last couple of years, and if that does include you, again, if you flooded in the 2011 Brisbane floods as well, just make sure you are prepared and ready for this tropical cyclone's rainfall. There's going to be a lot of it, so again, just make sure you've got your sandbags ready, you're preparing your house, and you're moving things up to a second story. And if you live in a really flood-prone area, again, if you flooded on the 2011 Brisbane floods, I would strongly advise you evacuate if you have the means to do so. It's not necessary at this time, and I imagine evacuation orders will be put into place for those extremely flood-prone areas, but if you flooded in 2011 or your property flooded in 2011, you've got no meaningful measures against floodwaters through your area, then I'd strongly advise getting out of there and moving yourself to a less flood-prone area at this time. Those on the Gold Coast as well, from storm surge alone, expecting some pretty significant flooding through Broadbeach, Mermaid Waters, up towards Main Beach as well, Southport, those sort of areas, expecting some significant flooding through some of the canals there, and water levels are likely to rise right up towards people's doorsteps and people's backyards. So I'd recommend having a couple of inches of sandbags around each door and window as well in these areas as well. That's just the safest thing that you can do right now. Some really significant rainfall can be expected in these locations through the Gold Coast canals, and that also includes people up towards Coomera, into Sanctuary Cove and the Coomera River as well. I'm expecting significant flooding there, but it should only be minor and certainly nothing unprecedented for the Coomera River, but definitely down on the Gold Coast as well, just considering the rainfall flowing through the Nerang River and the storm surge expected. I'm expecting some significant flooding through there. Anyways, this video has ran for long enough. I do hope that it has been of help to a lot of people across the southeastern parts of Queensland. There'll be an extended update on this tomorrow as well, with all the details necessary for this tropical cyclone and the tropical cyclone impact that is expected. I'll have plenty of lists over on Facebook, so make sure you check me out over there. A special shout out, of course, to the channel sponsors. Without them, there'd be none of this that exists, so their support is much appreciated, and that is all from me today, and I'll catch you all in the next storm. Goodbye.